Sometimes, the quietest neighborhoods hide the loudest secrets. That's exactly what happened when a small, tight-knit suburban community found itself in the middle of the most unexpected drama of the year. And it all started with what the HOA called an eyesore. An old car. A dusty, forgotten-looking vehicle parked in a driveway at the edge of Willow Creek Estates. From the outside, it didn't look like much. The paint was dull, the tires hadn't seen the road in years, and the windshield had a faint crack on one corner. Kids passing by on their bikes used to joke about it, calling it the neighborhood relic. But what nobody knew, what the HOA certainly didn't know, was that this so-called junk car was worth more than every single house on the block combined. And the man who owned it? He was about to turn the entire HOA upside down. The drama began one sunny morning when the HOA president, a sharp-tongued woman named Linda, walked through the neighborhood with her clipboard. Everyone knew Linda. She had the kind of energy that could drain the life out of a room in seconds. Always checking lawns, measuring fences, citing rule violations, she treated the HOA rulebook like it was the U.S. Constitution. That morning, her eyes locked on the old car in the driveway. She stopped, scribbled something down. Her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. By the afternoon, a bright orange violation notice was slapped onto the car's windshield. The paper fluttered in the wind like a warning flag. The notice read, "Vehicle violation. Unsightly, non-operable car. Remove within 7 days or face fines." 7 days. That's all they gave him. The homeowner, a man named Mark, didn't argue. He didn't yell. He didn't even take the notice down. He simply folded it neatly and tucked it into his pocket. No one knew what he was planning, but those who watched him said there was a strange calmness in his eyes, like a man who had already won a battle no one else knew was happening. By day 3, the gossip was spreading like wildfire. "Did you see Linda's notice?" one neighbor whispered to another near the mailbox. "She's finally getting rid of that junker," someone else replied. "About time." People laughed. Some even nodded in agreement. Nobody questioned Linda's judgment. After all, the HOA prided itself on neighborhood aesthetics. Clean lawns, fresh paint, no eyesores, no exceptions. But behind closed doors, Mark was making phone calls. Quiet, strategic calls. The kind of calls that hinted he wasn't just some random homeowner clinging to a beat-up old car. On day 5, Linda marched back with 2 other board members. They stood in front of the car like prosecutors about to make their final argument. They even brought a tow company's number with them, threatening that if the car wasn't gone by day 7, they would handle it themselves and bill Mark for it. Still, Mark said nothing. He simply nodded, smiled faintly, and closed his door. It drove Linda crazy. By day 7, the entire neighborhood gathered to watch what they thought would be the car's final day. The tow truck rumbled down the street, chains rattling, ready to drag the so-called junk away. Linda stood proudly with her clipboard, ready to check off another victory for the HOA. But then, Mark finally stepped outside. Collected. Almost too calm for what was about to happen. Instead of stopping the tow truck, he waved his hand. A sleek black SUV pulled up behind him. 2 men in sharp suits stepped out, carrying official-looking documents. Cameras flashed as if a press event was happening right there on the driveway. Linda frowned. The board members exchanged confused glances. The men in suits announced loudly enough for the whole crowd to hear. "This vehicle is a 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO. One of only 36 ever made. Appraised value, $2 million. Gasps rippled through the crowd like thunder. Linda's face drained of color. This wasn't a junk car. This wasn't even a regular collector's car. This was a legend on wheels. A piece of history worth more than anything anyone on that street had ever owned. The tow truck driver froze. He didn't even want to breathe near the car now. The neighbors stared in stunned silence as Mark pulled out the title documents proving ownership. And then, as if that wasn't enough, he revealed something else that made jaws hit the floor. The land beneath the HOA's pristine little neighborhood? The entire block? Mark owned it all. It turned out that years ago, long before Willow Creek Estates even existed, Mark had purchased the land at a tax auction for next to nothing. When the HOA was formed, they assumed the land was under their control because of the housing development agreement. But Mark had never sold his ownership rights. He simply allowed the neighborhood to exist on his property. Now the same people who mocked his car were technically living on his land. The silence that followed was heavy. Linda tried to speak but stumbled over her words. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Everything they thought they knew about this man, about their neighborhood, about their precious HOA rules, had just crumbled in seconds. And Mark? He didn't gloat. He didn't shout. He simply turned, locked his gate, and left them standing there with the weight of the truth sinking in like a stone in deep water. But this was only the beginning. Because the HOA wasn't about to give up control easily. And Mark? He wasn't done revealing just how much power he actually held. The battle lines were about to be drawn. Some wars are fought with weapons. Others are fought with words, paper, and power. And after the shocking revelation about the $2 million car, and the fact that Mark owned the entire block, the HOA of Willow Creek Estates was humiliated but far from defeated. Because the moment Mark revealed his hand, the HOA began plotting revenge. The neighborhood was buzzing for days after the incident. People whispered about Mark's car, his land ownership, and the look on Linda's face when she realized her clipboard full of violations meant nothing. Some neighbors started treating Mark with sudden respect, the kind usually reserved for someone who could change their lives with a single decision. But not Linda. No, she was different. The HOA president was used to winning. She had never been publicly embarrassed like this before. And the thought of losing control over the neighborhood, the one thing that gave her power, was something she simply could not accept. So, while the neighbors gossiped and speculated, Linda gathered her board members for a private meeting. There, behind closed doors, she laid out her plan to strike back at Mark in ways he wouldn't see coming. The first sign of trouble came when the HOA suddenly announced new, emergency regulations. Things like parking limits, property upkeep requirements, even restrictions on how many guests a homeowner could have at once. On the surface, it all looked like standard HOA business. But the timing was no coincidence. Every rule was designed to make Mark's life harder. They knew they couldn't take his land, but they could try to bury him in fines, paperwork, and headaches until he snapped. The neighbors saw what was happening, but nobody dared speak up. After all, the HOA controlled everything from pool access to holiday events. And crossing Linda was like painting a target on your own back. At first, Mark didn't respond. He paid no attention to the new rules, the violation letters, or the thinly veiled threats tucked into his mailbox. He spent his days quietly working in his garage, occasionally polishing the Ferrari that had set off the entire storm in the first place. But what the HOA didn't know was that Mark was already 3 steps ahead of them. Because while Linda and her board thought they were waging war, Mark was preparing for something much bigger. The breaking point came one Saturday morning when the HOA attempted to hold a public hearing against Mark for what they called chronic non-compliance. They set up tables, brought out paperwork, and even had the nerve to post flyers around the neighborhood announcing that homeowner violations will be addressed. People gathered, expecting fireworks. And they got them, just not the kind they expected. Because before the hearing could even begin, Mark arrived with a thick stack of documents. Not violation notices. Not complaint forms. But something else entirely. It turned out Mark had hired a team of attorneys the moment the HOAs started escalating their attacks. These weren't just any lawyers. They specialized in property law, land rights, and HOA overreach cases. And the documents Mark brought with him? They revealed something so explosive it made the Ferrari incident look like child's play. Years ago, when Mark purchased the land, he had negotiated a little-known clause in the county records. A clause that essentially gave him what lawyers called development rights. Meaning not only did he own the land, but technically, he had the legal right to approve or deny any structural or administrative changes within the neighborhood. Everything, from fences to community centers, was supposed to require his approval as the original landowner. The HOA had been operating for years without realizing this, which meant every single rule they enforced was built on paperwork that Mark could now challenge in court. The crowd watching the hearing was stunned. Linda's face turned red. The board members shuffled nervously. The neighbors whispered to one another, realizing the entire power structure of Willow Creek Estates had just been flipped upside down again. The HOA tried to argue. They tried to save face. They even threatened lawsuits of their own. But Mark's lawyers stood firm. The law was clear. The HOA had overstepped its authority for years, and if Mark wanted, he could shut them down completely. The next few days were chaos. The neighborhood split into two camps. Some supported Mark, seeing him as the underdog hero standing up to years of petty HOA bullying. Others sided with Linda, afraid that losing the HOA's control would turn their quiet community into chaos. But while everyone argued, Mark was quietly making his next move. Because owning the land and having development rights was one thing, but he had one more card to play. One that would change everything forever. It started with construction equipment appearing at the edge of the neighborhood one morning. Bulldozers. Surveying crews. Trucks hauling in materials. The HOA panicked. They rushed to confront Mark, demanding to know what he was building. But Mark stayed silent. The neighbors speculated wildly. Some thought he was putting in new roads. Others whispered about a private clubhouse. A few even joked he might be building a castle just to spite the HOA. The truth was far bigger than anyone imagined. Because Mark wasn't just fighting the HOA anymore. He was about to make sure they never had power over him, or the neighborhood, ever again. And when the dust cleared, everyone in Willow Creek Estates would have to choose a side. Some battles end in a truce. Others end in defeat. But this one? This one was about to end with the most unexpected twist Willow Creek Estates had ever seen. Because while the HOA had been busy fighting Mark over rules, paperwork, and control, Mark had been quietly building something much bigger than anyone realized. And when the truth finally came out, it would leave the entire neighborhood, and the HOA itself, speechless. For weeks, construction crews moved in and out of the neighborhood. Bulldozers roared, concrete trucks poured foundations, and workers carried blueprints across the once quiet streets of Willow Creek Estates. At first, the neighbors assumed it was some kind of private project. Maybe a workshop. Maybe a garage expansion. Nobody knew for sure, because Mark kept everything tightly under wraps. The HOA, on the other hand, was furious. Linda and her board members filed complaints, demanded permits, even tried to stop the construction through county offices. But every time they tried, they ran into the same problem. Mark's legal paperwork gave him full rights to do whatever he wanted on his land. The HOA had no power to stop him. None. Finally, after weeks of noise, dust, and speculation, the construction ended. What stood at the edge of the neighborhood wasn't a garage. It wasn't a clubhouse. It wasn't even a mansion. It was something far bigger. A private community center, complete with gardens, a swimming pool, walking trails, and a beautifully designed event hall. But here was the real twist. It wasn't owned by the HOA. It wasn't controlled by the HOA. It was privately owned by Mark, and open only to residents who chose to join his new association. In one stroke, Mark had created a direct competitor to the HOA itself. Residents now had a choice. Stay under Linda's strict, rule-heavy HOA, or join Mark's new, voluntary association, where there were no ridiculous fines, no endless violations, and no power-hungry board breathing down their necks. And the best part? Mark's association cost half the dues of the HOA. The neighborhood exploded with gossip. Families who had quietly suffered under HOA rules suddenly saw a way out. People who had been fined for things as small as mailbox colors or lawn height began canceling their HOA memberships left and right. The HOA board held emergency meetings. Linda stormed through the streets demanding loyalty from residents. But it was too late. Mark had outplayed them at every turn. As weeks passed, the once powerful HOA began to crumble. With fewer members paying dues, their budget collapsed. They couldn't maintain the pool. They couldn't host events. They couldn't even pay for their own legal bills anymore. Meanwhile, Mark's new community center flourished. Families held barbecues. Kids played in the pool. Neighbors hosted birthday parties in the event hall without paying outrageous HOA fees. The power had shifted completely. But Mark wasn't finished yet. One evening, as the sun set over Willow Creek Estates, Mark hosted a massive neighborhood gathering at the new community center. Everyone came, residents, former HOA supporters, even curious outsiders. There, in front of hundreds of people, Mark made one final announcement. He was officially dissolving the HOA's authority on his land. From that day forward, Willow Creek Estates would be a free neighborhood. No more pointless fines. No more power-hungry board. No more Linda. The crowd erupted in cheers. Families who had lived under years of HOA pressure hugged each other. Kids celebrated like it was a holiday. Even some former HOA supporters admitted they were relieved to see it all finally end. Linda, humiliated and defeated, quietly resigned. The HOA was finished. And as for Mark, he became the most respected man in the entire neighborhood. The Ferrari that started it all now sat proudly in front of the community center as a reminder of the day everything changed. In the end, Willow Creek Estates became a peaceful, thriving community. No HOA, no power games, just neighbors living the way they wanted to live. And it all happened because one man refused to back down and revealed secrets nobody saw coming. Call to action. If you loved this wild HOA story, there are even crazier ones coming your way. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon so you don't miss the next jaw-dropping drama. Because trust me, the next story might be even bigger than this one.